I'm going to go through every single weight class in boxing. I'm going to give you guys the best fight to make, as well as the biggest fight in boxing to make. And what I'm going to say is some rules right now around this, because there's going to be some confusing situations here. Here's the rules I've set for this right now. They must be currently in the weight class according to the rankings, and I can only use a fighter according to one ranking class. So there's a couple guys to think off the top of my mind. Conor Benn, he is ranked in both 147 by a couple of things, as well as 154. I'm only going to put him in one of those. So I'm not going to have him be the top, the biggest guy, the best fight to make, the biggest fight to make at 147 and 154. So that's going to be the case, as well as you must also be active in the rankings. I know Pac-Man was just added into the rankings, but he does not fight, and that's a whole other story for that situation. So guys like Pac-Man is not going to be in there. The Charlo brothers will not be in there. Those type of situations. Just to kind of outline the table for you guys, that's the rules for the situation. And also clarify, the best fight is clearly not going to be the biggest fight. The best fight is the two most talented fighters making the best fight possible. The biggest fight for this next section will be the fight that would sell the biggest. Whether that be domestically, that be internationally, depending on the weight class, that does matter. And it might not be the best fight, but it's the biggest fight, the most eyes, the most casual fans that would want to go watch it. It might not make a lot of sense, but casual fans would tune into it. So just clarify those are the rules. Let's hop into this game now. The heavyweight division. The best fight, in my opinion, to make is Alexander Usyk versus Joseph Parker. I believe stylistically and I believe talent-wise, that is the best fight to make at the heavyweight division. The alternative to that will be Usyk versus Dubois, which we are getting at Wembley Stadium. Either one is fine with me, but in my opinion, I think stylistically, the Joseph Parker chess match with Alexander Usyk would be phenomenal to watch. The biggest fight in the heavyweight division, which I actually think is the biggest fight in all of boxing, is Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. When you talk about domestically, how big that's going to be, you could sell at Wembley Stadium. That is the biggest fight to make in the heavyweight division. Alternatively, there were a lot of things on the table for this one where I came to the conclusion of, because of the fact that you're going to go UK versus United States of America, and this does partially hinge on the fact that I expect Deontay Wilder to go out and have a big fight in a couple of weeks. This should be an easy setup, and if he gets a big KO, this fight would be the second biggest. Wilder and AJ. As I said, is it anywhere near the best? Is it a good fight to make? No. Is it entertaining for true boxing fans? No. But would that fight sell still massively because of the fact that you're having UK versus United States of America, two mega names that casual fans would be entertained in seeing? Yes. And that's the reason I put that fight over the likes of a few other ones. It still would be a mega fight to make in boxing, especially if Wilder should go out there and have a big win against the trash can that's going to be fighting in a couple weeks. Let's go to the Cruiserweight division. The best fight to make, I think, is easy here. Jai Opetaia, Zurdo. No other fight you need to be making in boxing right now besides Jai Opetaia and Zurdo. The alternative, Jai Opetaia versus Badou Jack, but the gap between those two is massive. Everybody wants to see Jai versus Zurdo. The biggest fight also is Jai Opetaia versus Zurdo. That's pretty straightforward in that division. The alternative for that, Jai Opetaia versus CBS. There was a lot of fight brewing right there when CBS was the world champion prior to taking the Zurdo fight. I think the rivalry was kind of starting to brew a little bit, and that was the fight to make. You talk about British, you talk about Jai Opetaia, that's a big fight you could make down the road. Light heavyweight, the best fight to make is Bivol versus Beterbiev. I've said this time and time again. I love Benavidez. Bivol Beterbiev, I think that's number 4, number 5 pound-for-pound rankings right now. That's who I've got. It doesn't get much better than that. It's probably the best fight you can make in boxing still to this point in time. The alternative to that is a darn good alternative. Dimitri Bivol versus David Benavidez. And I think we're going to end up getting that fight when the fight rematch or the trilogy happens with Beterbiev and Bivol. But that's the alternative there. The biggest one is definitely going to be Dimitri Bivol versus David Benavidez, though. When you talk about those two guys, that would be huge. Benavidez has the biggest brand in all of boxing right now in that division. And you talk about those two guys, would be a huge fight to see. Then the alternative for that, Bivol versus Beterbiev. You could make a debate, and a legitimate debate, that it's Benavidez versus a guy like Callum Smith or Anthony Yard, something along those lines. But I'm going to go put up with Bivol. I think it's still a big fight to make. At 168, the one that's tough about this weight class is that I believe that there's a large gap between Canelo Alvarez and everybody else at 168. So therefore, I'm not going to put him in any one of the best fights to make at 168. Simply because, as I said, I don't think there's a competitive fight for Canelo Alvarez at 168. So the best fight to make, in my opinion, Caleb Plant, Christian Mbilli. I believe that those are the two top guys not named Canelo Alvarez. Alternatively, I think Christian Mbilli versus Pacheco stylistically would be a great fight to make. That would be a great fight. The biggest fight, Canelo Alvarez, Caleb Plant rematch. I think when you talk about the two brands of those guys, obviously that would be a huge fight to make again. Alternatively, you could have Caleb Plant versus Berlanga or Canelo versus Berlanga. Now, the truth is that both those fights that we'd have, I didn't want to put two Canelos with former guys they already fought. And so I think the brewing of how big of a rivalry you have already starting to form with Caleb Plant and Berlanga needs to happen. You could say Charlo, but I said Charlo's not involved in this ranking list. At middleweight, 160, the best fight, Janibek versus Adames. I have interviewed countless guys at 160. Every single one of them but one has said they want to see Janibek versus Adames. That's the fight I want to see. That's the best fight to make at middleweight. The second biggest one, or the best one, Janibek versus Laura. A unification, great fight to make. The biggest fight to make at middleweight, Janibek versus Chris Eubank Jr. You're going to have Chris Eubank Jr. is by far the biggest name to have now at 160. That's the guy that I want to see. And I think Janibek, Chris Eubank Jr. would be massive. Secondly, alternatively, Chris Eubank Jr. versus Carlos Adames. You could argue that's the biggest one, but those are the two options I've set there. At 154, the best fight to make is Bud Crawford versus Bachram. I think Bachram is one of the most underrated fighters in the world right now. That would be a massive fight to make. Alternatively, Bachram versus Virgil Ortiz. You could say Virgil versus Bud Crawford, but I think Virgil Ortiz versus Bachram would be a massive fight to make there as well. The biggest fight to make in the division is Bud Crawford versus Conor Benn. I would love to see those two guys go after it. That would be a massive fight to make. I don't know if that's ever realistic, but biggest fight, as big as Conor Benn is right now, as big as Terrence Bud Crawford is right now, that's the biggest fight to make. You could do that either in the United States of America or the UK. Alternatively, would be either Conor Benn or Bud Crawford versus Virgil Ortiz. That's the second biggest fight to make at 154. Let's head over to welterweight now, 147. The best fight to make is Boots Ennis versus Brian Norman. I think those are the two guys we all want to see. That's a perfect unification fight to have there. Alternatively, Boots versus Devin Haney. That would be a great fight to make right there. I think stylistically, that'd be good to see. That's the second best fight to make. The biggest fight at welterweight, Jerome Boots Ennis versus Ryan Garcia. You could argue Devin Haney, that's the alternative here. Now, because of the way that Ryan Garcia performed, it does dim the light here. Beforehand, this was without a shadow of a doubt going to be Ryan Garcia. But still, I think when you talk about the biggest brands, the way that Ryan Garcia can promote a fight, the build-up to that fight, I do believe that Ryan Garcia and Boots would still be a big fight to make, if it's at least the biggest fight to make in the weight class. Second to Devin Haney and Boots would be the second option there. At super lightweight, 140, the best fight to make is Teofimo Lopez versus Richardson Hitchens. Alternatively, Richardson Hitchens versus Gary Antoine Russell. I really do like Gary Antoine Russell. I think he did his thing against Rayo. I think the way he's looking right now, preparing for his upcoming fight, he looks legit. I would like to see those two fights. The biggest fight to make in a weight class, Teofimo Lopez versus Richardson Hitchens. That would be a massive fight to make. You have the New York ties, domestic fights right there would be a huge fight to make. You could do that probably at Madison Square Garden, the Barclays, whatever it would be. Massive fight there. Alternatively, the Teofimo Lopez versus George Kambosos rematch. That's a fight that I'm still shocked has not happened yet. Teofimo Lopez has one loss on his record. George Kambosos. And while Kambosos is certainly a good fighter, don't get that twisted, Teofimo Lopez is a better fighter than George Kambosos overall. So the fact of the matter that Teofimo Lopez has not wanted that revenge yet, shocking. But I think that Kambosos, especially if Kambosos goes and beats Hitchens, that becomes the number one fight to make in the weight class, both best and the biggest. Let's go to 135. The best fight to make at 135 is simple. Tank Davis, Shakur Stevenson. No debating that. And while I'm at it, that's also the biggest fight to make. The alternative to that is Tank Davis versus Keyshawn Davis. That's also a very good fight. Then you have the alternative to that would be Tank Davis. The biggest fight would be the Tank Davis versus Keyshawn Davis or Lomachenko. Either one of those would be big. Obviously, if you're going to have the biggest fight at 135, Tank Davis must be involved. So that's that answer there. Super featherweight, 130. The best fight, Navarrete versus Lamont Roach. I think that would be actually a really underrated fight to make there. I would love to see that fight come to fruition. If Lamont Roach stays at 130, that's obviously to be determined. But for now, he's according to the rankings, he is at 135. So that's the best fight to make there. Alternatively, Navarrete versus Foster. I think that also would be a good fight. The biggest fight, Oshaki Foster, Lamont Roach. Two American guys, domestic fights. Both would be a good fight to make there. The second to that would be Oshaki Foster, Ray Ford. Both those guys I've been seeing on X have been going back and forth. I feel like that's a fight that is brewing at the moment. And I think that would be a big fight to make at 130. 126. Let's hop into featherweight. The best fight to make, Espinoza versus Nick Ball. I get it. It might just be myself and how I want to see that fight. But I think both those are the two best guys of the weight class. And also, it would be one of the most unique fights to see. There's an 11-inch difference between the two of them. That would be phenomenal to see how that plans out right there. The alternative to that would be Espinoza versus Fulton. That also would be a good fight to make. And then the biggest fight. I think Stephen Fulton versus Nick Ball would be huge. You could easily do that fight somewhere in the UK. I think that would be a massive fight to make. The alternative to that would be Espinoza versus Nick Ball. The biggest fight to make at 126 would have to revolve around Nick Ball being involved. I think he's the biggest brand, the biggest name. And as I will say, UK fan base, they have the best fan base in boxing. I'd say them in Japan is probably neck and neck, depending on what you like. But those are the two most diehard fan bases for boxing. And so Nick Ball being one of the biggest stars out there right now, that would be something that Nick Ball has to be involved in for the biggest fight at 126. Super Bantamweight 122. Let's go to the best fight to make. And once again, very, very similar to how I said about Canelo Alvarez at 168. Nobody at 122 at the moment is anywhere in the realm of where Inoue's at. I don't think that you're going to throw anybody against Inoue that's going to be competitive for him. And so when I put this, the best fight to make at 122 does not involve Inoue. You might debate that because you might think Inoue versus MJ is going to be a good fight. I don't think so. It is what it is. So the best fight to make at 122 is MJ versus Goodman. Goodman just came off a good performance the last week on Wednesday, actually 1 week ago from today. That would be the best fight to make. Alternatively, MJ versus Alan David Piscasio. Piscasio was the guy who was supposed to go fight Inoue instead of Cardenas. Obviously, we were treated to a special fight that Cardenas more than did his job, but Piscasio would still be a good fight. The biggest fights, however, have to involve Inoue. Therefore, the biggest would be Inoue versus MJ, which we'll be getting in September, as well as Inoue versus Goodman, who Goodman could have had his opportunity to fight Inoue 2 times, both in December and then January. The cuts prohibited that. Does he ever get his chance again? I don't know. But it still would be a good fight. You have Australian ties, Japan ties, 2 big nations involved there. 118. Almost done with this. 118. The best fight to make at 118 is Junto versus Nishida. Nishida is an incredible fighter. Phenomenal fighter. If you have not watched him, I would highly encourage you to wake up early in the morning. If you're in America, at least that's what we have to do, to go watch him. He is phenomenal. Junto Nakatani versus him would be a great fight. Alternatively, Nishida versus Tatsumi. You could have said Junto versus Tatsumi, and I understand too, Tatsumi has now lost his belt. He's not going to be able to fight for about a year because of his eye injury. So I debated about whether or not to put him there, but at the moment, he still is listed on the rankings, so I decided to keep by my rules there. So Nishida versus Tatsumi would be a great fight, hypothetically. You could also say Tatsumi versus Junto, but I believe that the gap between Junto and Tatsumi is a little bit larger than it is for Nishida versus Tatsumi, so I put those two guys neck and neck there. Stylistically as well, they match up better. The biggest fight, Junto versus Nishida, as well as Junto versus Tatsumi. The biggest fight will have to revolve around Junto Nakatani. He's the biggest branded name at 118. 115. The best fight to make is Bam Rodriguez versus Fernando Martinez. The alternative to that is Bam Rodriguez versus Cafu. Both those fights would be the best fights to make in boxing right there, I believe. You could have made a debate. Fernando Martinez versus Roman Gonzalez. That also would be neck and neck. I could possibly put that instead of Bam versus Cafu, but I did go with Bam versus Cafu because I think Cafu is very underrated. I do like what he brings to the table there. I think he actually will be an interesting test for Bam Rodriguez when they fight in July. The biggest fight is Bam Rodriguez versus Fernando Martinez. The alternative to that is Bam Rodriguez versus Roman Gonzalez. Both of those would be big fights to make at 115. Let's go down to the flyweight division at 112. The best fight to make is Taraji versus Ibuki. That would be an incredible show. Ibuki is an incredible fighter. Moved up to 112. He did his thing. And I think you talk about a guy in Taraji who might be moving up to 115. I think he's actually done at 112. But at the moment, he's listed at 112. Taraji, Ibuki would be phenomenal. That also is the biggest fight to make in the division. Alternatively, though, Taraji versus Anthony Alaskazgua. That's another guy that I do like to see. That would be a good fight to make. The alternative for the biggest fight to make at 112 is Taraji versus Galal Yafi. That is a fight. I think Galal is an incredible fighter. I think he's going to be a world champion. I think he's going to be fun. He's going to have a great run there at 112 for as long as he lasts there. That would be a big fight. You talk about Japan, Great Britain, great fight to make there domestically overall there. You could make it in Japan or you could do that in the UK. I probably would be held in Japan, but still, either way, it would be a great fight to make. The 108. Takami versus Araneta. Neither one is a world champion, but if you go by pound-for-pound rankings in the way I think they both are, they will both be world champions within the next few months. I think that's the best fight to make. Alternatively, Takami versus Badillo. I like both these guys as well. Let's go to the biggest fight to make at 108. Takami versus Rosa, and alternatively, Takami versus Santiago. Rene Santiago just pulled off that big upset a few months ago, becoming the world champion. I like what he brings to the table as well. The last one, minimum 105. The best fight to make, Collazo versus Jerusalem. I would love to see that fight. Collazo is the best fighter, the biggest name at 105. I believe he's going to become a multi-weight class champion in the future. He is a phenomenal fighter. But yes, the best fight is Collazo versus Jerusalem. The alternative for that is Collazo versus Zhu. Coming out of China, he's a future world champion, in my opinion. The biggest fight to make is Collazo versus Zhu. That would be a great fight to make. And alternatively, the biggest fight to make at 105, and the final thing to list here in this group, is Collazo versus Jerusalem. As I said, Jerusalem's a world champion. He's a great fighter as well. I have Collazo winning that fight, but that still would be a big fight to make. With that being said, that concludes it. We just went through every single weight class. I listed the best fights and the biggest fights for each and every single one of them. Obviously, there's room to debate in a lot of those. I get that. These are just according to my opinion, according to my rules I put there, and that's the rankings I have set there.